All right. Back again, those candles I did earlier are still burning, and I finally largely finished this book, Practices of the Necronomicon, by Adam Sommerfeld. Not bad. There's actually a lot of good in it, and I started reading the electronic version, and I was pretty convinced that the first 40% of the book is largely nonsense. And most of that opinion is still there, but I can explain why, actually. So first, let's kind of get out of the way. This is for the... Oh, is it the Cult of Cthulhu or the Cthulhu Cult? This is a semi-religious organization, and they make no bones about that, but they are very much Satanists at heart. And the book is largely for those that want to LARP in a way that this book advocates for. There are real interactions to be had. This is largely based on it's more about collecting those like-minded individuals together rather than I'm trying to be careful about how I word things, because there's a lot of good stuff in this book and there's a lot of horse shit in this book, and I'll get to both of those things. But really, this is not much different in the way that it's organized, in the way that it's formed, with regards to the group work, as just basic Anton LaVey Satanism rituals. You know, they're mimicking the interactions between a priest and the congregation. It's pretty typical for that. It just has Lovecraft trappings on it, and that's really there's really not much more there with regards to the rituals. I'm not talking about interactions with the entities. There's actually a lot to talk about here. Like I said, I started with the electronic version, and the first 40% is largely not worth much. And we will kind of talk about that. But the some of the middle parts aren't too bad, actually. There's some usable stuff in here. But you need the reason I wanted to preface that this was not much different than basic Anton LaVey Satanism with some Lovecraft drapings on it is because they have about the same mentality and points of view on the world. So there really isn't much more that they can do besides basic stuff. Right. They're kind of, they'll say, oh, it's up to the individual cultists. It's up to the individual cultists. And they do consider themselves a cult. But it's I can't speak to the author's actual experience. I do know they were part of that, the Bible of Cthulhu group, whose author's name is Winter, who clearly, there's a lot of parallels between the Bible of Cthulhu and this book. Whereas the Bible of Cthulhu was obviously, it was a lot like the Don Webb vampire book. You know, they're like, oh, you can kind of believe in some stuff, but mostly we just want to get like-minded people together. Really no different than the Satanic Church, at least the writings back in the day. I'll say that, because I've not been a member of that in any way. I have read their stuff. I read their stuff back in high school, and it resonated really strong with my emotional point of view back in high school, and it's pretty clear that some of these people never left. So... oh no, there's gonna be some bombs out here. The book itself, I think, it's good for a certain crowd, right? If you're a hardcore Lovecraft, love anything Lovecraft, if you're a purist, you're not gonna like it. There's a lot of derivative stuff in here from the other authors, and they're unashamed about that. There's a significant portion of the book in the back that talk about the authors and have recommended reading lists for those authors. that either worked with or were influenced by or respected by H.P. Lovecraft. So it is pretty good if you want to kind of understand some of the historical things in there. There's a lot of good in that for here. There is interactions with the authors where they stayed the same, where they kind of differed. There's more time and effort, in my opinion, put into talking about those aspects of the book than there are for the magical system. So if you're looking for like an actual magical system that's actually worth something, this is going to be your book. Okay. Not that these things are worth less, they aren't. But if you're looking for something substantial, this is not the book. This is not the book for you. Okay. I didn't. Every so often I get these things where I kind of am told I need to start reading something, and I find something, and usually it elevates my knowledge in a certain area. So one of the last times I did that, I was inspired to read about Chinese magic, to see if anything had been published that didn't sound like it was, Dragon Ball Z shit. And I came across the works of Jason Reed, which led me to Fox Magic, actually. I had that feeling again, and then I found that 3 more books have been published about Fox Magic from a different school with a very different point of view. And those were pretty interesting. They kind of correlated some of or validated, some of the experiences that I had, and that I had separately that I didn't know from Jason's books. But anyway, so this happens with the Necronomicon stuff too, mostly the Lovecraft stuff. And most of it, as I said in my last book review about this topic, most of it I don't find of a lot of value, because I'm not a hardcore fan of Lovecraft or that series. Yog Sothoth came to me, and an aspect, I'll say, or servant of Yog Sothoth came to me, and then that kind of got me kickstarted, because I hadn't even read any Lovecraft when this happened. I just knew who it was, generally speaking, and that's how my personal journey got started. So I was already well into different types of magic at that point, and so now I'm like looking at the rest of these things, and most of them it's not about the magic, right? Black Book of Azathoth was pretty decent. It's a pretty good book. I don't think I ever reviewed that. I haven't done a video on that. I did review it, but I didn't do a video on it. So okay, cool. Let's get back to topics here. Sorry about that. But one thing I wanted to highlight is that it does give some red flags, a lot of red flags, for when you start dealing with cults, right? And if they're more of a tongue-in-cheek cult than they are, well, I can't really say they are a religious organization, because they are technically a religious organization. But they give a list of, these are red flags for other cults, and they at least state that they are against those things. Some of these are pretty reasonable things, right? It does say here in the beginning, I wanted to highlight this actually, is this book is based heavily on a book called The Cthulhu Cult by Venger Satanas, who has also made some RPG stuff. I had not heard of this person. I've not read that particular book, but this book uses it heavily, relies on that book heavily. And in here, Venger, which I don't know if it's Venger or Venger, to be honest, does state that, more than welcome to use the material as long as it doesn't lead to like illegal or really unethical behavior, to not have to read the whole thing. So I do like that they highlight some of these things that you should not be seeing in these groups. And these cults largely operate independently, right? So they might be affiliated with it, or they might be their own group, but any local group is largely going to be run by locals there, and that means that It's going to vary from group to group. They largely have a series of things they all believe to some extent, and then that's about it. So very loose. So if you had a bad experience with some of the people that might have been in one in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean that the same people are there, or that in the city there's, next city over, where you have a group, that there's going to be the same. They are independent like that. There is some talk here about the different forms of the Necronomicon and things like that. It's not bad. If you're into the history of stuff, then that'll be good. But all right, you can tell I'm about to start opening some worms here. We did talk about that. Let's see. I did want to highlight this art, and it'll lead me to like the next section, because I really did like some of the art from this book. It's like here we have Shub-Niggurath, but it also gets to my next point. This is what the sigil looks like for that, right? Oh, is it going to focus or not? Come on, man. All right, essentially it's basically just like a sperm impregnating an egg. They do have blocks of text between the pictorial representation and then these associations. They do give some history about either different versions or changes over time. A very rough overview of what the entity is, and these will change over time. No, excuse me, they won't change. They'll change throughout the book. So some are like a lot larger than others because there's more written about them. But you'll notice that there's some of this artwork up here. These are like, they're basically equivalent to runes, which they do have runes listed for all these things. And that actually is one of my first. I really hope that checks out. I'm sorry if it doesn't. One of my first complaints about this book. Now, if you've ever read any of the rituals by, Anton LaVey or those of his ilk, they're real simple, and there's not a lot of depth to any of it. So here, one of my complaints isn't that they didn't, there's no associations. It's that most of the associations are probably bullshit, right? So now how can I say this? Well, there are a couple of reasons actually, because there are some chronic problems with using Lovecraft entities in a modern in our world here, but we'll get to that in a bit. But my complaint actually is less that they actually do something like this, but more that it's not explained. It's like, oh yeah, these are what they are. Sorry, Scooter, I'm not going to take you at your word. That isn't how I roll. Just because something says something's true doesn't mean it is. Otherwise, we'd all either be Zoroastrians or still be stuck in Christianity, right? They do kind of make the case. It was kind of humorous. They do make the case in here that Saint Nim is really, what is it? Cthulhuin. Oh my God, Cthulhuanism, or however they're pronouncing it. Because they're saying, oh well, Lovecraft's work predate the Satanic Bible. It's kind of cute that they did that, but it's also kind of stupid, right? It actually lends less credibility to what they're trying to say. And I get that a lot of this book is about wanting to LARP in a light, magic light way, in the Lovecraft world, and that's really all that this book is, right? And then they want to find people that believe similarly, or at least similarly enough to get along, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the basis for clubs everywhere, right? Yeah, there'll be some differences, but you believe enough, and you believe enough similarly, and then you get those people together, and do whatever they decide to do when they're together. So, but there's a lot of this. The sigils are all simplistic. There's no reason given for any of these associations. It's kind of like a trust me thing, which I usually have issues with. And they would probably say, oh, well, that's up to each cultist to decide. Sure, it is. It is up to each cultist to decide. But some kind of indications of why these are supposedly useful and associated that way would have been good. Because it's just like a lot of other associations. You know, somebody wrote it down and then somebody else repeated it. And it usually doesn't mean a damn thing. Like earlier today, you know, when I was letting Helios, you know, pick out what incense he wanted. If I had consulted some guide, it would have been something else. So, a lot of it's arbitrary. But I do want to highlight the artwork. These letters up here are their versions of runes. I stated that, but they just look sloppy, and that's just an additional thing to get to feel like you're actually living in the Lovecraft universe, the mythos world. It doesn't really do anything. So, outside of somebody else thinking it's special, we'll get to some of that too. All right. So remember when I said that first 40% of this book is largely horseshit, and there are reasons for that. One is that it does go through. If you can see that, there are no pages in this. There are no page numbers in these books, so I can't say, oh, from this page to this page, because I guess printing page numbers on books was a bit beyond the capabilities of the modern printing process. This is, I suppose somebody would find this interesting. But a lot of this is just let us sprinkle some Lovecraftian stuff onto personal beliefs, and then put it in some kind of narrativized format, like it's some sort of Bible. You know, I mean, there is some base stuff in here, like for example, it says, Book 4, number 7, for if Azathoth were to awaken, all would cease to be, since we are all but Azathoth's dream. Okay, yeah, that fits the mythos. Yeah, I'm good with that. But then the one right before it, though, is whose name no lips dare speak aloud, and who gnaws hungrily in inconceivable unlighted chambers, beyond time, amidst the muffled, maddening beating of vile drums and the thin, monotonous whine of accursed flutes, to which detestable pounding and piping dancing slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly. So they're kind of just mimicking dramatic Bible verses in here. I mean, you don't, and if you keep in mind that this is, you know, their occult doctrine, you know that makes sense. But in here, you're not just going to get the Lovecraft stuff, though. You're going to get some very heavily influenced, you know, LaVeyan Satanism dribble. So, like here, arrogant atheists, you know, this is where they start kind of, if you've read the Satanic Bible, and if you realize they sound like they're like 15 or 17 and pissed off with their parents, and they continue to sound like that decades later, you know, that's kind of the same thing you're looking at here. You know, they do tone it down. After this stint here, there's some worse stuff besides this. Actually, this bookmark down here, but this is a sizable amount of their nonsense. So some of this, so in most of this book, there's a combination of Lovecraft and Satanism, LaVeyan Satanism, specifically theistic, of course. And you kind of have to sift through the bullshit, and there's a lot of bullshit. So here they have their little Bible verses that are, you know, whatever. But this is actually, this part right here is the next. This is a different section. And this is where they get into the elitism part, where they really do sound like they're 17 years old and pissed off their parents. Now, most Satanists, LaVeyan Satanists that I know, are usually above average intelligence, but not above average emotional maturity. And again, like I said, the ones that I know, and this reflects that. So you have things in here about debt bondage, and you know, while they do specifically dissolve themselves of any sort of racial right-wing sort of things. Some of the groups that have been in the news in the past for really horrendous things. They still believe a lot of the same things, right? I'm not saying that they're racist. I'm not saying that they advocate for that. I'm not saying that. But in here, you'll find a lot of stuff that would ring. It could easily be lifted off of those pages. So these are all about society and their personal views on society, and that's really all that they are. This is where they're basically going to push away anybody that wouldn't belong to some of those more right-wing aspects. I'm not saying that they're, I'm not calling out the right just specifically. I'm just saying their points of view in here are very, very comparable. And I'm a middle path person myself, so I have a tendency to believe things on both sides. So, but here it's some of the same old elitism. They won't say it's eugenics, but it's pretty much a more toned down form of that in a lot of ways. Not completely. They don't advocate for killing them. They just kind of advocate that the old ones do it for them, which we'll get to. So, yeah, this is a sizable amount of material in here. So if you remember that last bit, which is like from here, this is what I meant. So when I said about 40% of the book is nonsense, this is what it is. And you can say, oh, you're just pushing your points of view on them. Yeah, sure, I am. I bought the book twice. Yeah, I think that kind of means I can do that a little bit. Now, I'm not going to say they're wrong. Usually there's a lot of references in this book, right? A lot of references. In just about every chapter, you'll find a lot of references. Right, so here's 2 pages of them. But it's important to know that and understand that these are usually just justifications for what they already believe. Right? It's just like a lot of things, though. Like if you come into this book and you're like, cults aren't real, there's no, you're an atheist that's like, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and then rail on it. Well, it's a cult of Cthulhu, right? It says it right in the title. They're unashamedly a cult, right? So it's kind of stupid to go in there and do that, and I'm not doing that actually. All of these things in here, all this political horseshit that they put in here, elitist nonsense. These are just justifications for what they want to believe, right? They're already going to believe it. So I would look at all these references. Remember I said they're usually above average intelligence? So they will make arguments based on what they find. It's just what they find. It's going to be tailored to what they want to find. So they're not going to tell you about all the stuff that shows that they're wrong, at least with regards to this, right? They're not going to do that. They wouldn't, right? It doesn't support their point of view. So I wanted to bring that up because it is they have every right to believe what they want to believe, right? They do. Like I did serve. I was in Iraq, and I was an infantryman in Iraq, and I didn't just serve for freedom of speech for people that who support my views, right? Now I realize that freedom of speech really is about the federal government. It's not about personal freedom of speech. But the point does stand, though. Just because I disagree with what they're saying doesn't mean they don't have a right to say it. And I absolutely disagree with a lot of stuff that they said in here with regards to social issues and the elitism that they brought into that, which none of this really has any place in Lovecraft itself, as in, well, hold on, let me say, the Lovecraft entities, we'll say. It doesn't really have any place in that. This is just the Satanism part coming out from that. And since they were heavily affiliated with LaVeyan Satanism and similar Lovecraft groups that are basically the same way. I think they're defunct now, the ones I'm thinking of. But they got a right to think the way they want to think. It doesn't mean I have to approve of it, and I largely don't. but they don't need my approval. So, yeah, I want to rail against it, right? But I really shouldn't, because that's not really, it's not useful. So let's just move on, right? Okay. Now that we got the horse shit out of the way, at least some of it, they do talk about the 3 laws here, and those are self-empowerment. Let's see what the other 2, I didn't write them down, sorry. Yeah, awakening and the Code of Cthulhu. They do talk about ascension in here, and I think it's kind of cute, but they define it as self-empowerment, right? Which means, okay, most ascension, if you look up ascension, and you look up all the people that use ascension, regular ascension, black ascension, descension even, because some people have decided there must be descended masters because there are supposedly ascended masters. It's usually just a fucking ego thing, at least that I see. Anyways, so it does talk about this, but they define it as self-empowerment. So, okay, that's fair. They kind of have to, right? Because they do state in this book, they talk about death, the afterlife, and they have to take a neutral stance on it, right? And I don't know if that's just logical for them. Okay, we can't prove it, therefore we can't say it is there or not there. I would lean towards that way. And there is no official stance on that for the cult, but they do say that it's kind of up to each individual member to decide as they see fit. But their self-empowerment laws really are kind of like self-help guidelines to live by, because I guess there weren't enough of that in the last chapter. But there are some good things in here, but most of it's just kind of common sense, right? You too many people do not take credit for the work that they do, therefore you should take full credit for anything you put your hands on that works, I guess. And they'll also say that you're kind of responsible for the outcomes of stuff too. So they take that that approach where, okay, uber responsibility, but take full credit for anything. And I wanted to touch on that because there's a tendency to do that with magic too. You get 3 or 4 people all casting for the same thing, and all of a sudden, you'll see the more ego-driven ones are saying, "Oh, this was all me," and yeah, maybe it was, but it's doubtful. They kind of take this to that same kind of extreme though, and it's actually not. It's not really beneficial, in my opinion, because it doesn't give you a clear indication of what you can actually do. And so when you take credit for all the good, instead of a measured amount of it, then you're really lying to yourself. I think we should probably take more credit than maybe we do sometimes, especially those of us that like, okay, I shouldn't think that highly of that because, I need to keep myself tampered down to like in my case, balance, right? So there's some things in here that I could probably use too, but they're mostly just self-help stuff, right? This book is really basic in a lot of ways, and I was going to get into that later, but this is kind of it. They're giving you lifestyle tips here, which you could say that, yeah, this is part of the Bible, that might be relevant to that, but I don't know. It just, if anybody got past the last part of that thing, these are probably, somewhat in check, right? Yeah, there really isn't much more to say about these things. They're kind of like just, hey, we think you should live your life like this, and you can tell that. Remember all the when they're trying to find things to justify their opinions, there's gonna be a shit ton of links on there, and it's just like one. So they're largely just pulled this stuff, and they didn't feel like they needed to justify what they said. So pretty good indication of this is just generic stuff. The Awakening is a bit different. This really just gets into, hey, you need to pay attention to the world and believe that last 40%, where they're basically just railing against their political views and emotional opinions on the way of the world. And that's really what Awakening is. Yet they have to there are they explicitly state that woke Satanism isn't Satanism in here, while also saying that they are fully inclusive and accepting of people's sexuality and personal stance on those things. So they're trying to kind of have it each way, and they're trying to make it themselves more palatable. But here in the Awakening is one of their second laws, though, is where they were talking about the societal things, and they explicitly mention those sections. It's like, if you don't agree with this, then you're not going to be able to follow the laws in the cult. So it's no different than the one run by Winter, whatever that group was, that didn't believe in magic at all, really. It's kind of like, if you believe in us, then okay, cool, you get to play in the group. But they're pretty intolerant in their points of view, and this is being the second law, referencing all the societal things, which has nothing to do with the old ones, really. I mean, they'll try to push it that way, but again, it's just them using the trappings they need to justify what they want to believe. So then we have the Code of Cthulhu here, and this is kind of where they just rehash some of the same principles of LaVeyan Satanism, just in maybe some more better packaging, right? So really doesn't mean anything. Anybody that's a serious occult practitioner, before they get in here, already has a lot of these things in them. So this is more like okay, you must be new to the occult and magic, but you want to play in our universe, so we need to tell you something. Here it does talk about, I wanted to highlight this too, here it does talk about traits of narcissists, and he does caution against using them. Of course, he says, use them judiciously, essentially, which is the way, kind of the way of the world in a lot of ways. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes we do need to say what we need to say, right? All right, there's no point in getting into examples of that, but it does talk about these different parts of it, like over attention to things, like love bombing, for example. Basically, it's just about manipulation. And I did want to give credit that at least in the text, because I've not been to one of their groups, that they do admit that you should probably be a more of a substantial person than somebody who would use a lot of these things as on the daily, right? So now there is a part in here that talks about love and trying to love the right way, which just seems kind of odd. I get that it's a behavior and they want to do it to kind of lay out some sort of a baseline, but I don't really understand why love got its own section, frankly. All right, now here's the thing, the great work. The Cult of Cthulhu. This is where we're going to get into some of the issues, but more of the issues. The Cult of Cthulhu believes that they have a responsibility to help the old ones come back and basically bring about all the doom and gloom nonsense that they just talked about in their society sections, where they're hoping for a collapse because it'll make them feel better and soothe their egos that they were right finally. You'll find the same talk in a lot of the just generic Satanist stuff. So they like to do that. They're just using the Lovecraft trappings to do that. because they just said they will rise again and come back and enslave humanity. And also mentioned in Lovecraft stuff is where some of those tribes do worship some of these gods, and as a consequence, they will be kind of spared from the destruction of the rest. And if you think there's a glaring problem there, actually, I may as well just get to it now because I'll probably forget. All right, we know that everybody thinks that there's going to be a society collapse and that the elites will reign and the rest will perish. But if you really think that, then you don't understand the elites, if they're even real, right? I mean, we know there are elites, but not quite the same level. I'm not using some of these keywords because I don't want them in my videos. But if you think that there are some overlords, the few pulling the strings of the many, I mean, there are in every society, right? Even down to the city level, you're going to get that. Usually they're elite because other people do their work for them, right? And if everybody dies, there's not going to be anybody there to do the work. You think they're going to do it? Fuck no, they're not. Use your heads, goddammit. All right. So the Cult of Cthulhu thinks that they have a responsibility once they've made the Dark Pact, or whatever they call it, it's the equivalent to that, to help bring about these changes. And it's a cute narrative, but the problem is that they will come back related to the stars. So what do they need you for? You see what I'm saying? It makes no sense. So there is that issue. It's kind of like right there in front of everybody, and I don't know why it just isn't. It's not as fun to talk about, so that's probably why it isn't. But I don't see why these exceptionally powerful overlords need your attention daily or weekly to bring about the change that has been written of as belonging to the stars, right? Once the stars are in alignment, they will rise again. The hell does your attention have to do with that, right? Unless, we think we can move the stars. Although rumor has it that many of them move themselves. So, yeah. So this is the great work in worshiping these gods to then have them rise up is just part of the LARP for the cult, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think sometimes that from the way it reads in here, they either want to convince people that that's the way it's going to be, or they actually believe it. And you can say, Norris, you don't know everything. Yeah, I don't. I guarantee you I don't know everything. But that's like just glaringly in front of them. And it seems kind of silly to me. Now, that being said, I still give daily offerings to Hushiem, the Fox Immortal. I'm not asking the Fox Immortal to enslave all of humanity and destroy those that aren't worthwhile. So, bit of a difference. All right, they do go through these ranks, and yeah, they do go through some of the old, some of the other groups in here too, and you can find the names on there. They're not bad, but these are all ego titles, right? You got to have a leader, but does it have to be, priest of Relia? I mean, no. I suppose it's good for the LARP though. The high priest in Ipsissimus is I'm kind of surprised he used Ipsissimus, but that's just kind of like a tongue in cheek, I guess, because there's not a lot of advanced magic going on in this book. That's just the way it's going to be. All right, now he does talk about the Dark Pact for the Black Book of Azathoth. He does make reference to God damn it, Cain. Right, I'll have to get it back. But anyways, he does say you can take your initiation with there, but they offer one in here. They start showing about things like with altars, and they do recommend. He mentions somebody in here. They're on Etsy. I did look at them, and their stuff is really cool, but its stuff's also really expensive. I mean, all my idols and stuff like that in here that I haven't paid $50 for any of them. I've come real close, but some of these are like in the hundreds. So good stuff if you want it. But I've been working with Yog Sothoth for quite a while, and my idol for him, which I've shown elsewhere in the rituals, is right here. Also bought off Etsy, so works out pretty well. All right, here, let me. All right. Okay, so the daily devotion thing is another thing I wanted to bring up. Now, this is a theistic group, right? They do believe in worship in the practical and I don't know what else I would describe that as. They do believe in it, but they're really more about worshiping themselves, because this is a satanic offshoot. So it is more about that. They do talk about being humble before them and things like that a little bit, but it's not like they're not heaping it on. But he does give some information about his personal practice with it, and that seems somewhat reasonable. He does say he does give a 7 day a week, 7 day thing here, where you're making an offering and any requests to the 7 that he's chosen there, right? And he does say that you should choose your own. You don't need to use his. Here, let me get some water here. Excuse me. Okay. Now he does say that. I actually want to give him credit for that, because he says if you can skip these things if you want, but don't skip your dark pact work, right? And that is atone for the dark pact. I don't know why he uses the word atone, to be honest with you. It just seems kind of stupid to me, but it could just be I don't really understand his reasoning for using that word. So there's nothing to atone for if you've done nothing wrong. So since humanity didn't enslave these entities and doesn't keep them out, it just doesn't seem like atone is quite the right word. But the act of giving the offering, though, is actually I actually kind of agree with that in a sense, because here you're talking about and it doesn't have to be Azathoth in particular. Actually, there's an issue with that, but it doesn't have to be Azathoth. It could be any, but since we're supposedly living in the dream of Azathoth, I don't know why you would want to get his attention if you're trying to keep him asleep. So, I mean, if he wakes up, supposedly all humanity goes. So why would you want to call on him? It just seems kind of... I mean, from their perspective, I guess it would, because they're all nihilists and think that everything needs to die, except them, of course. And, yeah, I realize that's a blanket statement, but most of their stuff in there is about nihilism, and it has... I could see why they would say, yeah, let's go ahead and wake Azathoth up. Do I know that we're not living in his dream? No, I don't. But let's just hope he doesn't have sleep apnea, because then he might wake up, right? And we'd all be done. Suppose it wouldn't matter for them. Of course, they seem to forget that they'd be done too. But he does give a 7 day a week thing here with the entities that he's chosen. He suggests you can do that on your own. This is their symbol that they use for their dark pact atonement. You're supposed to stare into it and then empower it that way. That's not a new thing, So, but actually, I did want to show this. From here to here, basically, is the text for their daily thing. Now you do have to make some of it your own, like with your requests, and I think it's cute that they want to use some of these languages. I mean, if you want to live I almost said Minecraft. Whew. If you want to live in the mythos world and really live it, then yeah, I could see you be doing that. But see here, all right. So atone for the Dark Pact. Atone for what? So you haven't done anything. All right, whatever. Here's where they talk about their group work, and their group work is typical of simplistic rituals that would stem from the Jesus Christ, the Satanic Bible. The talking and the leading and speaking here, it's not bad. I mean, it's nothing great. Like I said, they do have the self-initiation ritual. I used Espen Kane's, that's whose name I was trying to think, from the Black Book of Azatoth. I still have the scars on my arms from it. And I specifically did that one because, one, it's the one I had, and two, I felt I should. So it's not something I would do lightly, and I didn't. And I still, I don't want to, well, I do serve in a sense. I do serve Yog-Sothoth in a sense, but it's more of a, he guides me, and maybe I put in some work for him or not. Usually just wants to fuck with me. And then I might get some small tidbit out of a whole lot of what the hell. So they do that. They give a little ritual here. And then they've defined all of these angles to have specific meanings with regards to the mythos and the cult specifically. So you can do that if you want, but now they do talk. All right, so angles in Lovecraft. He did talk about that a lot, and I'm sure that's what he saw. But I've used some of the angles, and it doesn't seem to do much. Of course, I'm not a ceremonial magician. I've used ceremonial means sometimes intensely for prolonged periods of time. I just don't. I don't seem to get enough benefit out of doing some of these things that other people do. I have a friend who gets a lot of benefit out of it, but they don't really do shit energetically. So, whatever. Here, the cultist name, I get it. It just seems like every time I open a magical book anymore, it seems like you have to have a name for something. Like when I was going through the Necromancer, you have the dead name, and that's the name that you're supposed to use when you're doing your stuff with the dead. Okay. You'll have your vampire name for Don Webb's vampire nonsense. If you want to, it would make sense like in a group. But I mean, if you want to do this, you can. It depends. It's only going to have as much value as you put into it, right? So now in some of these group ones, though, these group settings, when they have, when they want to do like their wish-making requests where everybody helps out with basically a group working, but for a request per individual, they actually do say to use your Lovecraft name here, or your cultist name, excuse me. And there's a dictionary in the back of words that you can put together that other people have just made up, which they're honest about. So, but that's what it is. It's only going to have as much meaning as you put into it, and you may find that personally, I think I would do it a different way, and that if I did this, I would choose a temporary one. Then I would ask for one whenever that time was right, but whoever I was closest to in the mythos entity-wise, and then I would get an actual name that probably might actually mean something. But that's my opinion, and that's not going to happen right away, is it? So, in fact, with this book, I think you'd probably have a hard time, as is, having a tremendous number of interactions, doing things exactly the way they're written. So, that'll depend on the person still, and it depends on if the entity actually wants to work with you. I was going to bring that up actually with the sigils, but we'll get to it here in a minute. All right, there is this protective circle is actually mentioned several times, right? And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Partially because I get, magicians like protective circles because it makes them feel like they actually are protected, even if they really aren't. And, if you're calling these things into here so you can interact with them, then why do you need protection from them? If they're bound outside of the stars or under the ocean, what do you need protection from? If they live inside the earth and don't come out of their layers, do you need protection from them over here in ritual space? So, you can do this if you want. I don't think it matters. Let me rephrase that. Excuse me. It matters. It matters in the beginning for sure because you don't have the skills to deal with it without having one, right? Even then, it's still somewhat up to them if they choose to acknowledge it or not, because you're not going to stay in that circle forever. So if you're inviting them into your daily life and you're only in that circle for 20, 40, 60 minutes, then there's still 23 hours in the day at least that you aren't in that circle. So, and here they are inviting them into their lives for sure. So it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It's mentioned several times, but you can see here that there's not really a lot of stuff to it, because here, by the time you get here, you're actually already talking with them. So this is like ceremonial light, mostly to have some sort of ceremony, right? Because there isn't a lot of explanation. There's not a lot of getting to know some of these elements that you're supposedly using. And yeah, so people will disagree with me on that. I'm not really going to go into it much more. I mean, they're obviously they're allowed to have their own opinion, but so am I. So it does show this, and these pictures are slightly different in the electronic version than they are in the in this book here. The directions are kind of shown a little bit. There's not like all of these angle things here. I think we kind of get it the first couple of times that which direction we're supposed to go. So this is a little bit cleaner in the electronic version. Yeah. So that's not bad, but they do talk about pendulum divination. And I talked with somebody recently about that who's had trouble with their clairs. Now they can walk into a forest and feel the forest. They can feel the energy of the forest itself. But they're having a lot of problems trying to develop their clairs. So I'd asked if they'd actually used a pendulum recently. It's not that pendulums are the best tool out there, but it does allow your subconscious, who's going to be much more aware of what's going on, to kind of help. Excuse me. To help guide you in a meaningful way, to at least get the gist of what is at least needed from you next. And so here they're talking about this is one version of a pendulum. I want to say board because it's a circle, but board would be fine. There are plenty out there. You could make your own. Personally, I would use several. That way, if you need to use it for letters, kind of like a Ouija board, you can do that. Directions for questions. Generalized answers, that way you can move into maybe specific boards. It's kind of up to you, because if you think about all the conversations you can have where you might need specific names, places, it's going to take a while. So I would consider that at least. Just kind of be aware beware of the potential pitfalls of using a pendulum and how your thoughts can influence that action. All right. So here, a lot of times with their spell work and stuff like that, they're going to use their. Let me just go to the dictionaries part. Let's see. All right. So in here they have a list. Well, they have a list of correspondences for their candles, crystals. Again, there's no reasoning why they're using this. They're just kind of saying this is what this is. Some of these words of power are from the Simon Necronomicon, if I recall correctly, and some people use them and they work. I just don't. I don't like barbarous tongues. I think they're silly. That doesn't mean they don't work for people, because they do work for people, and I use them sparingly. But here you can see they try to correspond to this made up alphabet, which just looks kind of sloppy, to be honest. Then you've got your correspondences you can use these for, and they don't necessarily tell you why. There might be some reasons for this. Some of these are okay. These are similar things here, but for the most part, there's no explanations to why. So, but if you're into effects, if you want to like make a gate and like a non-trivial, I'm going to use this gate to lay in it, and then I don't know, go to the Dreamlands or something. You might consider using this because then that would help prepare your mind for the task that you have when you go to sleep or you try to astral project. So I can see something like that, the spectacle of ritual. But outside of that, I'm not really gonna. I'm really getting into it. Here they have some they do call a quick reference, which is good. But that's just their correspondences that they're making with what's what. There is a Necronomicon deck. I have it. I think it's packed. I think it's packed away. I've started packing, so. They do go through some of these moon phases, and they're largely just pulling this out of their asses. There's no reason why some of these are the way they are, at least to us. So maybe this is passed on from cultist to cultist, but since the cult is new, I doubt it. But if these things mean something to you, then by all means do that. Like the new moon being for Nyarlathotep. Well, okay, maybe. Yeah. I don't know why the third quarter is Cthulhu. So lots of stuff in here that just don't have answers. And they say, oh, well, it's not for you to decide. It's not for me to decide. I don't care. Here, the Dark Zodiac I wanted to bring up. Because the original Zodiac wasn't dark enough in any way. And so, actually, they're literally stating that in here. That the Zodiac itself is just too, it's too bright and cheery. So, therefore, they had to make their own. And you get some symbols for this that correspond to entities. I mean, most of this is just them rehashing some of their own, some of the somewhat core belief system of Satanism in general. Like down here, it says for Nodens, you don't fall for the simple vices of the masses, and others sense this of you and covet it. Oh, well, okay. Or nothing gets in your way of a prize that you want, be it physical or intangible. Those that try to take it from you will be harmed. Okay. All right. So if you like that sort of thing and you want to play that game, then you go ahead and play that game. So I don't much care. I mean, it's really like if you use the Necronomicon tarot deck by Tyson, and I forget the author. I forget. Give me the artist's name. I forget her name. But if you use that deck, it's a very, very dark deck. Right, you're not going to get a good, happy reading out of any part of it at all, and it is kind of that way by design. So, proper deck for, I guess, the proper questions, you could say. So, if you want to do the dark version of the Zodiac, then there you go. They have given this for you. Here's the alphabet. It just, I don't know. I mean, they've put a lot of work into this book, right? And it just seems just so sloppy. All right, here we have our dictionary, right? And they'll interchangeably use like ACLO and whatever hell the other name is. I just can't think of it right now. But these are word lists that people have used in their books or that they just made up for fandom and things like that, which, I mean, fine. This is where you would get your name from. Relian, excuse me. This is where you would get your name from. This is where you would string together words to make your requests to the gods. I mean, it's not that long, but, you know, doesn't have to be to get your point across. So they do have that in there. It's not bad. Let's see here. This is the amount of material towards other authors of the mythos that what they did, and recommended reading lists for that. You can see the artwork continues in here. I actually kind of like the artwork too, believe it or not. Let's see. They do get into chakras in here because you got to remember this is like they wanted this kind of be like a Magic 101 sort of book, but it's too flimsy for that. There are no explanations. There are very few exercises. And this is really so they could say, oh yeah, we did include that in there, and you should talk to somebody more knowledgeable, basically, to get better at what you're doing. But they do talk about creating a gateway, which I am a big fan of. I make a lot of those to bring those energies into my space. I have plenty in here, plenty in other areas of my property. I say property like it's, I mean, this is like a third of an acre. So it's not like I could walk back into the woods and all of a sudden I've got this huge shrine built up there. You know, but like there's one in the garage, then I have my cemetery out here. But it does talk about this, and there is some, you do and don't. I mean, but there aren't very many people that talk about using gateways for things, and I do it all the time, right? I'm about to actually put up the gateway that I made for this place I have visited with to make my requests of Cthulhu, and so I've captured that into this item I have over here, and that'll be going up. But you don't hear a lot of people, you know, talking about that. You can see shrines; they'll say shrines, but it's not quite the same thing, right? And here, really, what they're talking about is using the gateway to bring those energies into a place, which is typically how I use that term also. Sometimes you'll hear me talk about portals, and part of that is it's kind of similar in a concept, but to me a gateway is something that's tied to something physical, like directly, intentionally, and a portal is more like a shortcut. So, but gateways here are for bringing that energy into this this space, and in this case they're talking about using 3 rocks as an example here, and then painting runes or names, symbols on these, depending on which energies you want to call forth. And then, of course, you would empower those over time, or you can do it immediately, such as repeated, evocations into an object to then bring that energy to it more closely and more easily. Eventually, it becomes open. It does talk about some of these, other things you can do in here. Most of it's, thin. It's pretty thin stuff. It does talk about the hand signs, and the hand signs are in other books as well, but it doesn't really talk much about why you would genuinely use them. It gives some things in here, but it's kind of like, it's more like this is in the mythos, so we must include it. And here's a little blurb about how you would use it. And that's just kind of how it felt. It could just be that I'm not into it enough to know, but I don't think that's the case. I think that's all I really... Oh, we did was Unholy Water. Oh, my God. Yeah. I mean, it's not that Unholy Water isn't useful. It's just, they're calling it that just so they can try to be like the Church of Satan's and Holy Water. And they actually do state that, so I'll give them credit for stating that. But, yeah, I mean, that's really all I really wanted to go through. Like I said, the book does have some value, but be careful in some of those other areas. Let me look at my sheet here. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, they've got a lot of stuff in here that It tried to be a cultist manual for the cult itself. It tried to be a basic magic primer, which there is enough room in here for that. Things they don't go into enough detail for the why. They may know it. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, got that. Talked about why they would even need our help, and that's I brought that up to them too, actually. But well, them meaning I've asked Yolk Sothel, but he doesn't have a tendency to like to give answers unless he wants to. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that pretty much sums up what I wanted to go over. Oh no, these sigils. So these sigils are simple, very simplistic. But the more you understand evocation, depending on which group you're part of, evocation or invocation, demonology kind of muddies the waters on that significantly. But the calling of spirits, even a simple line like this can work, because you've already set the intent to do it, and if they want to come, they're going to come. Right? You don't need Belial's sigil to call Belial. So that should tell you that the sigil can help. And the sigil can act as a gateway to their power, right? But even something as simple as this can work. Because they're not terribly creative in the sigils in here at all. And I'm not saying that they have to be complex or something like that, but I mean, this is for Yig, the father of snakes, right? And it just looks like an S, backwards. Not a lot of creativity going on there. Or like the sperm and egg with Shub Niggurath. They don't necessarily have to be, though, because really what you're calling to them, and they'll come if they want to. You may not feel them. It depends on you and your abilities. You might want to get the pendulum ready, so that way it'll make a movement when they've come, and you can try to start verifying that. But this is not a good book to learning to use the pendulum, right? Bal Kadmon has one out there. There are plenty of free stuff out there for learning to use the pendulum. I would also encourage you to look up the I don't want to use dangers because that's not really what I mean. It's not downfalls or ways the pendulums can be influenced, pitfalls, I guess you could say, that can influence what you're getting answers from. So, because it's similar to the Ouija board, you're not really going to know who you're talking to until you get your clairs developed and then can understand it. So there we go. This was a long one, so yeah, this will probably take all night to load. All right, hey, if you made it this far, Jesus Christ, good job. And so I did want to review the book a bit and talk about some of the good parts and bad parts. There are some good parts, like I said, but just beware of that, of all the stuff that I talked about before you decide to jump in or not. Because there are other books out about Yog Sothory. And actually, I've got another one here I just haven't read yet. So keep that in mind. Just because I say it doesn't have to make it true. Just like these are all my opinions. They're not necessarily true to somebody else. So, all right, that's enough talking. Have a good Sunday.